Hi there, I'm Kevin Sullivan, and welcome to Caregiving 101, How to Be an Effective Caregiver. I was born with a condition known as arthrogryposis multiplex congenita, also known as AMC. This condition has made it where my muscles are weaker than the average person's, which requires me to receive assistance for activities of daily living. Everything from showering to getting dressed, to using the toilet, to preparing my meals. So today I'm going to talk to you about caregiving. Everything from the good to the bad and everything in between. Caregiving is a unique experience because it is also such an intimate experience. While it is technically a job, it is, more likely that the caregiver is going to develop a close personal relationship with the person that they are caring for. I host a podcast called The Long Way Around Podcast, which you can find at the QR code on your screen. I host that with my podcast partner. His name is Tony Jackson. And him and I were actually born with the same condition, which is interesting because on paper we have the same condition. But if you were to look at us in person, we look very different and have a varying degree of ability. In addition to the podcast, I also do motivational speaking, going into different schools, businesses, organizations, whoever wants to learn more about disability. And then I also am a big sports fan. I love going to Bears games and Cubs games, Bulls games, Blackhawks games. And I definitely have a passion for sports in addition to my passion for disability advocacy as well. Arthrogryposis is considered a rare disorder because it affects only 1 in every 3,000 live births. Obviously, there are conditions that are rarer than that, but it's pretty rare to find someone with arthrogryposis on a daily basis. I am more or less a textbook case. All of these symptoms I was born with. Now, luckily, many of them have been able to be corrected through surgeries, physical therapy, occupational therapy, and things like that. However, some of these are permanent, such as the internal shoulder rotation, the fingers in the flexed position, and the thumb in the palm. Those will always be part of who I am, and I have found ways to mitigate them. For instance, the thumb and palm can cause my hands to be sweatier, and that can be a pretty big problem, especially during the summer months when it's warmer outside. So I recently started getting Botox injections into my hands, which have really helped with that problem. So luckily, as technology has progressed, as medicine has progressed, it has been easier overall to manage these symptoms and in some cases mitigate them altogether. One of the good things about arthrogryposis multiplex congenita is that it does not affect critical organs. It doesn't affect your heart, your brain, your lungs, all of that. It is a purely physical musculoskeletal condition. So it only affects my muscles and my bones. My muscle tissue is more fibrous than the average person's, which causes general contractures in both my hands and my feet, and general weakness, which is why I need assistance with activities of daily living. Luckily, arthrogryposis is not a degenerative condition, so it will not get worse over time. How I am now is how I should remain throughout the course of my life. And then in order to walk, I know you're looking at me in a wheelchair right here, and I use this for longer distances mainly, but I am able to walk through the use of ankle-foot orthotics, or AFOs, which I am currently wearing. Those have been pretty critical. I would not be able to walk at all without them. I'm pretty unstable. I don't have a lot of muscle tone in my legs, so those are a pretty key part of making it work on a day-to-day basis. So now let's get into what is the most important part of being a caregiver. And it should go without saying, right? The most important part of being a caregiver is to care. It's found in the word itself. If you can't care, then you're probably in the wrong profession, in all honesty. I've been lucky to have many caregivers, from many different backgrounds who, they came to it for very different reasons. Some of them were future nurses. Some of them were future special ed teachers. Some of them were going into a field that had nothing to do with caregiving whatsoever. I've had everyone from an accountant to a math teacher help me at various points throughout my life. But the point is that it doesn't always matter what a person's profession is. It just matters that they're willing to do it and they are able to care. I've certainly hired caregivers who I felt like maybe did not meet this criteria, and unfortunately they didn't last as long. That does tend to happen sometimes. Luckily not super often, but you have to do what's best for yourself in the end. So the key really is finding those people who are willing to help. I think it was Mr. Rogers who once said that, always look for the people who are helping, because there are always people who are willing to help. And that is especially important in caregiving, is just finding those people who, they don't see it as a burden. They genuinely want to help because they see it as the right thing to do. So you're probably wondering at this point, well, you have all these caregivers. Well, how often are they there? So this slide here is a week in my life. Every week, this is how it goes. Morning, lunch, and evening. When you tally all this up, it's equal to 53 hours, which can add up pretty quickly, especially when you're paying about 20 bucks an hour. You can do the simple math, it's about $1,060 a week just to run my life. And that is just to make sure I am showered, dressed, fed, and anything else that may need to be done. It can certainly be a lot to manage. I will say that caregiving and managing caregiving is a full-time job. Everything from hiring to scheduling to interviewing to payroll, it all ultimately falls on me. So if something is wrong, or if a caregiver misses a shift, or if they need to be paid and I need to go get money from the bank, that all ultimately falls on me. So it is a lot to manage. Luckily, I've learned how to find good caregivers, ones who are responsible and ones who are trustworthy, which is easily the most important thing. If you can't trust the caregivers that you're hiring, it's not even worth hiring them, because it's not going to be a very good relationship, and it probably won't last very long, in all honesty. But I will say that I've gotten better at it over the course of time. I think a big thing was going away to college, and that's really where I learned for the first time how to manage my life with people taking care of me that weren't related to me, and how to manage different personalities, different work habits, different schedules. And that was huge in getting me to the point where I am today, where I feel much more confident in managing my team of caregivers than I may have at that point in my life. Now we're going to go into the do's of caregiving, things that I find to be helpful tips and will ultimately create a mutually beneficial relationship for the caregiver and the client as well. So the first one here, talk to them like they are your peer and equal. I've experienced it certainly, where I've had people come up to me and they'll talk to me like this, or they'll talk really loudly like I'm deaf. Both of those should be avoided. Always assume competence whenever you are interacting with someone with a disability until you have a reason not to assume competence. I think if everyone did this and everyone made a more concerted effort to make sure that they're talking to people with disabilities in a equal and respectable manner, this particular issue would improve a lot. Next, find some common ground. I know that it can be difficult when you see someone who's using a wheelchair and you're like, wow, like their life must be really different than mine. I don't know how I can ever find anything in common from them. And I promise you can. Yeah, like I use a wheelchair, but I also really like sports. I also am kind of a movie buff. I like going to concerts. I still do things that everybody else does. And the key is finding what that is with the client that you're taking care of. Usually there's something there. And if there's not something there, then maybe it's not the best fit. But ultimately, I think the key to it is asking probing questions. Find out like, hey, like, what do you like to do in your spare time? Do you go on vacation? Where do you like to go? What do you like to do? What are your favorite foods? Things of that nature. These questions don't have to be complicated. It can be just like playing a game of 20 questions, just like we did when we were kids. But it is very important to find common ground in order to improve the quality of the caregiver-client relationship. Point number 3 is arguably the most important. It is very easy for hygiene to slip through the cracks, especially if it's someone who has a disability. Maybe they're not able to bathe themselves or shower themselves every single day, or maybe they don't have the caregiving capacity to make that happen every single day. So if you're the person who is in charge of cleaning them, you have to make sure that it is done and that everything is done to the utmost degree. It is really easy for someone who is in a wheelchair all the time to develop what's called a pressure wound. And I know this personally because I had one for a while. From my sophomore year of high school through about my sophomore year of college, I had a pressure wound that was located right at the base of my tailbone, kind of towards the top of my butt crack, for lack of a better phrasing. And it was quite literally a pain in the butt. I had to deal with managing it and had to deal with different treatments to try to get this thing to heal. And we just couldn't figure it out until eventually I went to a doctor who actually knew what they were doing and was able to give a treatment that we had to do it every day for the course of a year, but eventually it did heal the pressure wound. So I cannot emphasize this enough, that hygiene is one of the most important things to being a caregiver. If there is one thing that you do correctly, make it this. And then the last one, be present and an active participant. Look, modern society has all sorts of distractions. We have our phones attached to us at the hip. We have our laptops, we have our tablets, we have all sorts of technology that is pulling us in a variety of different directions. And there are admittedly times where I have to say to a caregiver, hey, put the phone down. I need you to do this really quickly, and I need your full undivided attention. Don't be afraid to do that. It's very easy to get caught up in, oh, like I gotta respond to these texts, I have to look at these notifications, I have to do this, I have to do that. But when you're doing that and you are at a caregiving job, then you're not giving 100% of your attention to being a caregiver. And especially if you're looking at your phone while you're trying to complete a task. If you got some downtime, sure, take a look at it. But this is one of the most common things that I have to say to my caregivers today, is that they need to put the phone down and focus on exactly what they're doing. So now that we've touched on the do's of caregiving, let's take a look at the don'ts. First one, I kind of already touched on this. Do not infantilize or patronize them. It is demeaning, it is annoying, and none of us really like it. Don't talk to us like we're a baby. Talk to us like we are the age that we are. Talk to me like I'm a 34-year-old, right? I have a purely physical disability. There is nothing about arthrogryposis that affects my cognitive abilities. I'm able to maintain a conversation. I graduated college with a bachelor's degree in mass media radio. So there is no need to talk to me like I'm a 5-year-old. And I encourage you to do the same with others with disabilities as well. Next, and this is a tough one, overhelping. It is a very fine line between providing enough help so that the client is satisfied with the care they're receiving and helping too much, where they may get annoyed with you. I would say that the key is establish a good line of communication right from the start. Make sure you understand how they work and how they communicate, and make sure they understand how you work and how you communicate. it is a very easy thing to do. People do it to me still sometimes, where they'll help with something where it's like, no, I got this, I can do it. Because most people with a disability will tell you that if they can do a task themselves, they want to. Obviously, there are exceptions to that rule. Maybe there are times where it's a task I can do, but I need help with it for some reason. But generally speaking, if it's something I can do, then I want to do it myself, and I don't want someone assisting me with it. I would say it's really important to have independence because when you get to adulthood, it's a lot of being on your own and a lot of having to figure it out on your own. I know that when I was a kid, it was a lot easier because, my parents are always there. You have built-in caregivers who are there 24/7, and you don't have to pay them, which is pretty nice. But now that I'm an adult, I am faced with having to do more things independently or having to figure that out on my own. So I think setting up a client for that and not over helping can be really beneficial to them in the long run, so that when they are an adult, or they're faced with, maybe they lose caregivers or they get their hours cut, which can absolutely happen. They aren't freaking out about, oh my God, what am I going to do? Because I already know how to function somewhat autonomously. Next one, do not ignore a potential issue. It's really easy for issues to pop up, and it's really easy for them to spiral quickly. If you're unsure of how to handle it, ask the client, maybe ask other resources. If you're working for an agency, they may be able to provide some resources, or contact their medical professionals if they approve of it, of course, and see, hey, they have this issue going on. I'm not exactly sure what I should do, and find that out. Disability can lead to all sorts of health issues depending on what the client has going on. So ignoring something that could seemingly be a potential or a very small issue could eventually snowball into a much larger issue. When I had the pressure wound, it wasn't a full wound from the beginning. It was just a little tiny thing, and then it just got bigger and bigger. So it is really important to nip those in the bud as soon as possible. And I kind of already mentioned this too, don't be distracted by technology. It is so easy these days. I highly encourage you to put the phone away, or at least put it on do not disturb or a focus mode. I know it makes a difference for me just when I'm doing my job, and it does make a difference with caregivers as well. I tend to notice that caregivers who are more attentive, who aren't on their phone as much, typically are able to provide a better performance on a day-to-day basis than those who are a little bit more distracted in their phones. And then a couple other tips here, the 4 C's of caregiving. I think these are very important for any caregiver to know, regardless of who the client is. So the first one, be clear. When you're communicating with the client, make sure the expectations are set, what you're expected to do, what they expect you to do, and how you should go about it. I've had caregivers who maybe they'll start performing a task and they're not doing it exactly as I want it. So then we have to have a conversation like, hey, when you do this, I need you to do it this way. It's really important to establish that line of communication and keep it clear throughout the course of the caregiver-client relationship. Next one, being correct. You obviously want to make sure that you're not providing something that the client does not want. If they say, hey, I need to use the bathroom, and you start getting them undressed, that could be a problem. So make sure that you're doing the correct task in the correct manner that they're wanting. Because oftentimes there could be a reason they're wanting something done a specific way that you may not have any idea as to why. Me personally, if someone places an object on a slightly different shelf, that could completely hinder my ability to use whatever that object is or perform that task potentially. So it's really important to make sure that you're doing things as the client wants it, for whatever the reason may be. And then also, I would say it's very important to be careful, right? It's very easy with many jobs to get caught up in, oh, I have to finish this as soon as possible, no matter how well it's done. And that can be dangerous in caregiving. The key is getting everything done properly, more so than getting it done in a certain amount of time. If it takes a little bit longer on a given day, that's how it goes. There's nothing we can do about that sometimes. But the key is making sure that everything is done, and that you're also not hurting the client. Some clients are more sensitive to things like touch or, maybe scrubbing in the shower or things like that. So making sure that you're being as careful as possible, and making sure you're meeting their needs, and not overstepping is really important. And then the last one, be complete. Make sure everything gets done. When you throw a client in the shower and you're giving them a shower, and make sure that you get the hair, the body, and the face done, and whatever else may need to be done. If they need their beard trimmed, or if it's a female client and maybe they need their legs shaved or something along those lines, we got to make sure that everything is getting done in a timely manner. People with disabilities need care as well, and we want to make sure that it's all getting done when the caregiver is there. Because if we forget something and the caregiver leaves, then it's like, oh, well, now we're stuck with this for 6 hours, 8 hours, however long, until the next caregiver comes. So being complete is extremely important when you're caring for an individual. So I've talked a lot about caregiving in the sense of actually providing care. I do also think that part of being an effective caregiver is being a good advocate as well. People with disabilities face a lot of issues politically, economically, in addition to accessing various services such as education, housing, transportation, etc. So having people that are on our side is extremely important. If you look at the history of disability rights in America, by and large, major strides happened when people who are able-bodied and neurotypical got on board, with legislation such as the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, which are two very critical pieces of civil rights legislation that have really opened up the doors and opened up a lot of opportunities for people with disabilities to succeed in modern society alongside their peers. So what parts of advocacy are important for caregivers? First one here, encourage others to become caregivers and explain what it entails. There is definitely a lot of lack of knowledge when it comes to caregiving. I have interviewed caregivers who they didn't seem to understand what the job entailed. I've interviewed caregivers who were not super comfortable with what I needed. And I think part of that is we need to take away that stigma. And I think we need to introduce people to caregiving earlier in their lives. Because by and large, most people become caregivers at some point, whether it's a kid or a parent or a spouse or a child, whatever. This is something that is a very critical skill, and some people get thrust into it with very minimal notice. A parent gets sick and all of a sudden you're the one that's their caregiver, and you've never done it before in their lives. And now you're the one tasked with doing everything. So I think it's important to explain to others what exactly it entails. And we also need to encourage other people to become caregivers, because there is a caregiver shortage right now. It is not easy to find caregivers. It is a somewhat thankless job. The pay is not great and the benefits are minimal. So it is an industry that lends itself to having a high turnover because of that. Another way that caregivers can be good advocates for the disabled community is by avoiding disableist language and encouraging others to do so. I don't think I need to go into what words would fall under that. I'm sure you can take your best guess. They're probably words that we have all heard before, unfortunately. And unfortunately, these words and this language is still very prevalent in our society. Um, it comes and goes, kind of depends on a lot of things, including the entertainment world and the political world. But doing what we can to take that language out of our lexicon will go a long way in making people with disabilities equitable as a whole. I still hear these words far too often, more than I would like to, in all honesty. And I just think it's something that we can do much better as a society. The last way caregivers can be better advocates, advocating for better accessibility and the rights of disabled people. Like I said, we need buy-in from people who don't have disabilities in order to get anything changed in America. Time and time again, history has shown that. And this can be in a lot of ways. You know, this could be the physical world. This could be the legislative world. And I have a few examples that I'd like to share here now. So right here we have a restaurant. This is near where I live up in the suburbs of Chicago. And you can see here that the building on the right has a curb cut. However, the building on the left, unfortunately, does not. I have gone to this Potbelly many times. And one time a couple of years ago, I was going in there without the wheelchair, actually. And I noticed that there was no curb cut here. And I thought to myself, why? Why is there no curb cut here when there's a curb cut on the other side? And when I looked into it a little more, it actually made sense because the building on the right was built after the building on the left. So they built the building on the right with the curb cut, but they never went back and added a curb cut to the other side. So now, when you go to this Potbelly today, you can see that they have installed that curb cut. Now you're probably wondering, how did I go about this? It's actually much simpler than you may think. All I did was look up the name of the shopping center, and then I looked up the owner of that shopping center. Once I found the owner, I sent them an email saying, hey, this is the situation. I sent them some pictures. I think a curb cut should be installed here for better accessibility. And a couple days later, they got back to me and they said, yeah, you're right. We missed this. So we're going to install a curb cut. And I believe it was installed about within 2 or 3 weeks of when I initially reported it. So sometimes it really can be that easy to make something more accessible. A lot of the time, it's really about knowing who to contact and what to say, and framing it in a way that makes it like, hey, I'm trying to help. I have a disability, or I'm an ally to the disabled community. I noticed that this was inaccessible, and I believe this is what should be done to rectify it. And most people are pretty open to that, especially with commercial properties. Hell, you're doing their job for them. So it really does pay off sometimes, and it can really help make the world a more accessible place. And then this next one here was a sidewalk over by my apartment. You'll see in the red circle here that the sidewalk in this particular area was pretty broken up. Definitely a little bit of a tripping hazard. It was not exactly comfortable to maneuver in my wheelchair either. So I decided to get in touch with my town's public works department. And I explained to them, hey, I use a power wheelchair. I traverse this route often, and I feel like this sidewalk is not up to par, is not up to ADA compliance. And they explained that, yeah, you're right. And we actually have some programs that can help with this. So I sent this to them, and they're like, hey, we are planning on doing construction on this road in 2026, but we're actually gonna take care of this now. So this was a week later where they had marked the sidewalk for replacement with these white arrows. And then the picture all the way on the right was the actual replacement. This took about 2 weeks to get the sidewalk fully replaced. They were very receptive to it, and I have reached out to them a number of times, so they are a bit familiar with me, but it does pay to say something. This sidewalk would have just continued to be broken and old and not very accessible for people like me. And it would have stayed that way probably for another year or so, because according to this email, they do have different programs for sidewalk replacement. One is more proactive, one is more reactive, and the other one is when they have large-scale road construction projects. And in addition to that, he also had mentioned that they were planning on redoing this road in 2026, but because I reached out to them and raised the issue, they decided to do it right away. And that's why it's so important to say something if you see something that is truly inaccessible and could potentially be rectified. And then arguably now the most important part of being an advocate as a caregiver is standing up for the rights of disabled people. I don't want to get too into it, but I think we know that our rights are not always guaranteed. They should be, but they tend to come and go depending on a lot of things politically. I will say that I've never been more fearful for my rights as a disabled person living in America than I am today. And a large part of that is because of the headlines that you currently see on your screen, right? Our rights are under attack under the guise of being too diverse, too equitable, too inclusive. But those policies are the reason that I have succeeded as far as I have today. They're the reason that I was able to have a full-time job. They're the reason that I was able to have a K through 12 education and later a college education alongside my able-bodied and neurotypical peers. So if there is any one thing that you take from this presentation, it's that you have to fight for us. And you have to always fight for us no matter what. Because our rights, while they should be guaranteed, they come and go sometimes. And that can be extremely dangerous and potentially life-threatening, depending on what services or things may be cut. So a big part of being a caregiver and an advocate is fighting for us in the political sphere as well. So if you've enjoyed this presentation and you'd like to reach out to me, ask me some follow-up questions, or you'd like to bring me in for a speech at your school business organization, right here is the best way to get a hold of me. All of my contact info is listed right here on the screen. And you can also access my speaking website, kevtalks.com, at the QR code below. At the bottom of that webpage is the links to my social media. Feel free to check them out, shoot me a follow request, shoot me a message. I'd be happy to answer any questions and provide any further insight that you may be wanting regarding disability rights and being a caregiver. Thank you all so much again for watching. I greatly appreciate it. And once again, this has been Caregiving 101, the essentials of being a caregiver, presented by Kev Talks. I'm Kevin Sullivan, and thank you so much for watching.